Thank you, Premier. You certainly covered a lot of ground. And so there's lots to engage with in our Q&A. The Premier's got to leave a little bit earlier than we had in our schedule, so I'm just giving everyone the heads up. We've got Q&A for about 15 or so minutes. If you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand and someone will come around with a microphone. And as is the usual sort of practice, if you could just introduce yourself and who you're with, questions straight off the bat up the front. While the microphone's finding its way there, I'm going to ask you a question that I had on my list. It'll come on, don't worry. But also, which is sort of filtering through from the questions online, which is sort of where you finished off. So you've spoken in the media around the future being different to the past. You know, the economy's looking a bit different. I read that as harder. You've talked about some revenue softness, some economic softness, but also you've got this really ambitious infrastructure program and now a very ambitious mental health program. Will the levy you're talking about fund all of the investment that you're thinking about for mental health? And then more broadly, when you're looking at all the spending initiatives you've got going, yes, they'll be good for the economy, but where's your thinking and landing around what this all means for debt and how much debt is the right amount?
So we made a commitment at the last election, and it's not often that a government would go to the polls being really upfront about what we were going to do on the debt side of our balance sheet. And we said that for a number of multi-generational projects that are beyond the size and scale of any one government, if you like, or one set of forward estimates, that we would go and borrow, given how cheap money was, we would go and borrow to build. And we are delivering against those commitments. We've made some commitments and we have some budget rules about that 12% to GSP ratio, about where those borrowings would be purposed. But, you know, our city and state, for generations to come, will benefit from things like the North East Link. And it sounds odd to put it this way, but just as multiple generations will benefit from that project, multiple generations should make a contribution to delivering that project. If we only have the current tax base paying for everything we're building, then we will build much, much less, or all of you, in all your different capacities, will be asked to pay much, much higher rates of revenue to us. That is not sustainable, that is not sensible, and even commentators who are not necessarily my greatest fans have in recent times been talking about a very big debt raised and putting some money into the future fund, for instance, and letting it idle along there at a pretty good margin between its cost and likely returns from a fund like that, and then purposing the balance to build the infrastructure that we need with all the productivity uplift, all the benefits in lifestyle and quality of life. On the issue of revenue softening, we wrote down $5.2 billion worth of property revenue in the main at the budget in May. That I'd much prefer not to have had to do that. But at the same time, that's why you have surpluses, that's why you have discipline within your books so that you can weather a storm like that. We are seeing some improvements both in price and in volume across the property market. Part of having population growth as strong as we have, then that or people need somewhere to live. It almost always sees things pick back up again, perhaps not to the levels that it was 2 or 3 years ago. But again, no one ever promised it to be easy, and no one ever promised that the sort of boom times we enjoyed a little while ago were necessarily permanent. That's why you put money away. It's why you make a fast start. Those in the construction industry here today know that nothing today is cheaper than it was 2 years ago. So hanging around admiring problems, admiring blueprints and models, that's not the way we operate. We've made a fast start, and anyone who tells you that, oh, well, they started too fast and now they have to back off a bit, that's simply wrong. We started fast, absolutely, and we intend to maintain that pace because these projects are far too important, and the 150,000 jobs they underpin are far too important to me to do anything other than push through and get this agenda built.
Okay, question down the front here.
Premier, hi, Alan Blood. The infrastructure developments going on here are to be commended, and all Australia admires Victoria and your government for that. I would like to ask a question about one aspect, and that is to do with long-term water planning and needs. Is there anything innovative going on within the Cabinet and the mines in terms of the long-term needs of Victoria, in terms of this pressure thing, which is, as you know, in this part of the country, very much in demand?
Well, thanks, Alan. You need to get Lisa Neville back to a CEDA lunch. You should drink wine while she talks about water, because it's pretty heavy going. It's quite technical and can be quite a long discussion. She, I think, is, in all of Australian politics, she's probably, I think, the most capable in policy terms and understanding the riddles of this policy area and all the different competing interests. She does a fantastic job for us. Look, there's a whole range of issues, views, opinions, frustrations with the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. I prefer not necessarily to join the intensely political debate about that. We are part of that process. We have very clear views on the elements of that which need to be upheld. I prefer to have a much more civilised debate with other First Ministers, particularly around getting some infrastructure that we need built quickly. That's where savings can come from. That's where some of these environmental flows can come from, without doing buybacks, without compromising the irrigated ag sector that is so important to us, but not just us. In terms of water more broadly, there's a whole range of different programs. I'm happy to get a list to you. There's a whole lot of different stuff that we've funded along the journey. It's not necessarily been headlined. Probably many of the transport projects, because of their price tag and the fact they're so relevant to people's daily lives, they maybe take over. But we've had big upgrades in a number of different irrigation districts over the last 5 years. But certainly the Braxton-Brumby government criticised at the time. No one's criticising the desal plant now. You know, with a changing climate, with a growing Victoria, that insurance policy, which does have a cost, that insurance policy, we are claiming against that every year. And I was asked the other day, it was a bit of a question out of the blue, would I rule out growing the size of the desal plant, making it a bigger desal plant? And I simply said, well, I can't rule that out. I cannot rule that out. Our storage levels at the moment, despite the fact that it's been raining in Melbourne quite a bit, our catchments are not where we'd like them to be, and we've had the desal pretty much at full tilt for the last couple of years. So water is always going to be central to so many sectors and everybody's daily life. It's very political for a lot of very worthy reasons, but there's enough voices, Alan, in the politics of water without me adding mine. If CEDA wants to invite Lisa back to have perhaps a smaller group, maybe discussion about water policy, she'll be equal to the task.
Premier, you know we love a big crowd. Question over here on the left, thank you.
Thank you, Premier. It's Mary Ann D. Giallinato here from Maroondah City Council. So that's east of Melbourne, Ringwood, Croydon Way. I just wanted to thank you for your address, and clearly thank you for CEDA to putting on this event, and to thank you for the amazing changes you are making to our communities. If you look at the gambling work or anti-gambling work that's being done, the anti-family violence work that's being done, if you look at the work in the alcoholism space as well, if you look at females in sport, it's just revolutionary changes that are happening in our community. And honestly, from Maroondah's perspective, and I'm sure from all local government, we truly do thank you for those policy changes, albeit tweaking, but significant changes that are happening with our community. Absolutely a wonderful experience to be part of that as a senior officer in local government, and who's been around the traps for a long time, even though I only look like I'm 21. Now, the question really is one, and we've had the W water question. This is the W waste question, and not a surprise, because I'm sure the Treasurer has been mentioning to you that a few of us are getting a little bit edgy about the waste space. And myself as a Director of Corporate Services, unusual, but I actually do look after waste. And not that it's keeping me up at night, but I'm glad to hear that you have got some relationships going with China. I actually don't really mind who you have relationships with, but can we just get waste sorted, not only in Victoria, but nationally across all waste streams? I know you're doing a lot of work in the circular economy, but great to hear where we might be going to solve the problem. Thank you.
Sorry, can I jump in and just add? So top of the pops here, and the question is, in our questions is one, obviously people interested in the circular economy, but dare I say the letters CDS?
You could say CDS. Our position on the container deposit scheme is somewhat misunderstood. It's not that we're opposed to a CDS, but I think you have to be very careful because there's an interdependence and a relationship between so many different policy settings here. If you want a strong circular economy and for instance you want to make use of the highest value product, which is of course glass, if collected properly, then you need to be very careful that you're not undermining curbside collection, for instance, by putting a CDS in. Then of course there's the small matter of every state that has a CDS at the moment is operating a different type of CDS from every other state. There are some common features in that there's a deposit scheme, but how it works, who benefits, how collection is done, is no simple thing. I was talking with some senior people from Cleanaway the other day who are part of each of those CDS, and they made that point to me very clearly. Now, the circular economy issues, there's a lot of work going into this, you are right to say that, and the relevance of China is not who we have relationships with, it's the fact that they've forced upon us by a decision that they were entitled to make, that they're not going to take our waste any longer. I see this as one of those things where in a few years' time we'll look back and we'll be quite thankful for that. There may be a price tag associated, but I think there are many thousands of jobs that can be created and we can play our part. Rather than shipping a problem to the other side of the world, we can actually deal with it right here. The job opportunities, the investment opportunities are huge. And Lily D'Ambrosio, perhaps early next year, will have more to say about these matters, and I'm sure I'll be at her side and we'll be talking to you about more glass in road base, plastic recycled into freeway noise walls, potentially plastic railway sleepers, the list goes on and on. Waste to energy, which is already a feature at the moment. We've just provided some approvals, the EPA that is, to Australian Paper for a big waste to energy project that they're keen to get on with. Just before we finish on this topic, because I know it's very relevant to everybody, we are pleased that there's been some stabilisation in the curbside sector. That hasn't come by accident. We've had some operators in this space that are not particularly good in every sense of that term, and we stepped in and made sure that there was an opportunity for a going concern to be taken over, and we've now seen, I think, those 30-odd councils that were disrupted from time to time, they're now in a much stronger position. It's not just about burning everything, it's not just about burying everything, it's about being much cleverer than that, and I think we have the capacity to get a really strong circular economy strategy and investment to follow it. And it may well be, for instance, I'll leave you with this, it may well be that just as we've had reverse auctions for renewable energy, there may well be a reverse auction for support to grow recycled industries to make products we need and want from waste that we simply have to find something to do with. I'm actually quite hopeful and positive in this space. I think it can be a very good story with a cost associated but with benefits that far outweigh it. It'll take a little bit of time, but we are getting very close to having much more to say about this.
So, Premier, you've now given us 2 events for our program for next year, water and circular economy, which is great. I'm sure the audience...
There's a couple not to be missed.
I am... It is... Sorry. I was going to keep on with a straight face. It is pleasing, though, to hear you talking about tackling these problems and being optimistic about them, not just seeing that as a cost, but looking for the economic opportunity, which I think is what's been missing in some of the conversations.
And if I might say, well, we always do that. We always look for, is there a way in which we can turn this challenge into a really significant opportunity for our state? And one of the best ways you measure that, of course, is if you can create jobs and if we can have businesses that are making money from a problem, that's a fantastic outcome. I would just make the point, though, that you could add to the list of things that have come at us but are not of our making. Cladding, for instance. We've dealt with that issue this year. There's a lot more work to be done, I know, but and there has been a price tag associated, and we would have perhaps liked a national partnership, but ultimately Victoria will have to do this on its own, and no one should be in any doubt the work that Ted Bayou, and I'm very grateful to him, and John Thwaites as well, did. We have the world's most comprehensive picture about where the problem is, what the nature of the problem is, and what it is we should do about it. And that's in no small part due to the work of former Premier Bayou and former Deputy Premier John Thwaites, and I'll take this opportunity. I know there's a lot of people in the construction industry here today. We want to work with you as well, but I want to publicly acknowledge them for the work that they did for us.
Thanks. I think we've got the final question over here, if we could. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Premier, and And thank you for your speech this afternoon. It's going extremely well. It's Stuart Jacquet. I'm the General Manager for Corporate Affairs at Winslow Constructors, and I'm going to pick up on the theme that you've just been speaking on. You've got some challenges and some great opportunities in the state of Victoria. I think, first of all, I'd like to thank you for giving us these challenges and these opportunities. Winslow's one of the largest constructors in Victoria, family-owned company, and we employ over 1,000 people locally and right across Victoria. Your investment in Victoria's Big Build is having an enormous impact on the local community. It's modernising our state, and the infrastructure portfolio that you have ahead of you is very, very impressive. What I'm wondering is, with the size of the program that you've got, what we see is that it's going to require several people to help you get through this, and we'd like to know what the government plans to do about keeping the pace of spend up with these big programs. It will peak. There'll be a lot of demand on resources, and we'd like to know whether you've got a way of encouraging the participation of all of the mid-tier and large local construction companies in delivering this package and be at the top table.
So if I take you to, firstly, thank you for your very kind comments and thanks for the work that you and your team do. If I take you to North East Link, and it's an active tender, so I can't talk too much about it, but we did something that people were quite critical of at the start, where we said none of the big builders can get into a consortium together. They've all got to be split up. And we now have, I think, 3 significant consortia that are moving through that process. So sometimes it's a big broad stroke like that, or it's our minimum local content requirements, skills guarantees, some of the supply chain work that we do to make sure that at each part of procurement there's an opportunity, and indeed sometimes winning bidders are actually obliged to source local. That's a very practical thing you can do. There's no bigger purchaser of goods and services in Victoria than the state of Victoria, so the power of our purchase is something we've always tried to harness. At the same time though, it seems odd, but I've come to the view that we need more of those big tier 1 builders, whether they're from China or France or Spain or wherever it might be. We have all of those operating here now. We need more of those tier 1 builders to potentially come in and partner up with tier 2s and others to create some more depth in the market. And that's something that we've made no secret of, and the Treasurer has done some world tours trying to sell the different projects that we're doing. I had a big infrastructure forum in China only a couple of months ago. That's another thing that we can do. I think ultimately, if you go to the end of your question about shortages, concrete's expensive, gravel's expensive, labour's getting expensive. Ultimately, there are things we can do in all those areas, whether it's approvals for extractive industries or all the way through to free TAFE and partnering up what does industry need and when, and how do you remove a practical barrier to people starting courses, and fees are obviously a practical barrier to that. We've got a pretty well 100% more people, about 40-odd thousand, if my memory serves me correctly, 40-odd thousand more people enrolled in those courses today than we did a year ago. So that tells you that there are things we can do, often quite practical, simple things. And I don't mind conceding that many of these ideas and many of these issues we are much better off for the advice that we receive from corporations like yours and many others. You're right to say that you can't do it on your own. You need partners, you need people working with you. But I've always found that if you set the pace, others will follow and others will join with you, and all of a sudden there is a strength that comes from that sense of momentum. What we can't have is stop and start, and I give you a commitment. You won't see that. There's an awful lot that's in the ground now, but there's still plenty more to come. I'll give you a couple of examples. We will be underway on Airport Rail Link in 22. We will be underway on Suburban Rail Loop, the biggest public transport and indeed infrastructure project the nation's ever seen by dollar value and by transformative effect in 2022. North East Link will really be ramping up at that point. And then there are too many smaller projects to mention, things like Footscray Hospital, for instance. There's plenty of stuff happened, lots happening, but there's a lot more to come as well. So I think there's an embedded momentum, if you like. We don't take that for granted. We always have to keep adding to that. And even in a different economy, I think we are still very, very well placed to continue to be the busiest state, the place with the most momentum, the place where the government is doing the absolute most to underpin demand.
Well, that's probably not a bad place to end, I think, Premier. There's one sort of bunch of questions left here that sort of relate to tech and the new economy. I'm looking at one of your team over there and thinking I'm going to flip him an email and see if maybe we can get an answer to that.